Welcome to Key Conversations, where we talk about all the things to inspire you to create a sustainable and fulfilling music career. And this season, season 4, I am talking about the entire process of releasing new music, specifically a record, but you can apply this to any music that you're releasing. Today, I'm going to talk about mixing, and I have Chris Griffin here. I'm really excited to be talking with him. He's down in New York City in his studio. He is a mix engineer who's worked with some amazing artists. I'll let him tell you about himself in a second here. And then I'll talk about mixing my most recent record myself, but all my other records I've had Chris and other mix engineers work on. So we'll talk about how you can make this process seamless for them so that you're getting exactly what you want from your record. So Chris, thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Just give us like the 1 minute nutshell of like why you're awesome as a mix engineer.
Okay, yay. I don't know if I'm that awesome, but my major credits were Madonna and Kelly Clarkson, Janet Jackson, worked with John Legend, jazz guitarist John McLaughlin, and several others. I write for television. A lot of that stuff is on NBC. A lot of that stuff is overseas and different things. I have a studio. I was a performer. I teach at NYU 1 day a week, very adjunct. But yeah, I mean, I do a lot. And, I do a lot of sound design for synthesizers and so forth. So hands in different baskets. And somehow, 16 years later, we're still in New York City. So
super cool. I love it. You're also an amazing vocal coach. Anytime I do any recording sessions with you, I get the best performances I've ever had as a vocalist. I usually end up crying somehow. So that says something probably positive about you. So,
or very negative. We don't know.
Yeah, or negative. But if anyone gets a chance to record your vocals or any part of your CD or have it mixed by Chris, you are in for a very special treat. Yeah, so, but first, before I really talk to you about your process, I did want to share, because I'm getting this question, like, why did you decide to mix this record? And I've never considered myself a mixer, though I did have some tech chops from an early age specifically in college. I got into film scoring. And so I needed to learn how to line up the tapes with the audio and all that stuff. So I got the little bit of the tech side. And then when I started working in the advertising industry, everyone was using Logic Pro. I had some internships at recording studios. That's actually how I met Chris. He was an engineer when I was just a little measly intern, but I learned Pro Tools there. So I got some chops. I knew how to work the boards and all the things. But I've mixed my own film scores. I've mixed scores that have aired on national commercials. But that's all underneath dialogue. It's never front and center. So when I was doing my pop albums, I was like, I need someone who's a pro in this, who's the best at what they do mixing. And I knew that wasn't me. I knew I could get by, I felt very lucky about. But for this new record, Luminary, it's new age, it's piano, it's vocals. And I started reversing audio and I was playing with panning and space. And I realized that the production, which some people can sort of conflate, or maybe that's not the right word. They think that production and mixing are the same thing. Production is, to me, it's a little bit more of crafting the sound, more working with the composition. And it tends to be, in my mind, and Chris, I know you might have a different perspective on this, but production tends to be a little more creative, but still techie. Now you're in the tools. You could be producing while you're mixing. And I've seen producers sort of mix as they produce. What do you think the differences between production and mixing is?
Well, for me, I do tend to mix as I go so I can hear what's next. Does something need some mid-range carved out, and can I put some like candy on top of something, or is it going to be too thick? So I do try to mix as I go, but it's never the final mix. For the final mix, I just zero out and come back because it's always a different hat. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say zero out, meaning you bring all the levels back to the same level, and then you redo the automation or the writing the
yeah, I just start over, 100% start over, and it always ends up being way better in the end. So.
Interesting. So for me, when I was working on this record, Luminary, I would record three minutes of just sort of me tinkling on the piano and plucking piano strings and humming and doing some breath stuff. And I'd had 3 minutes of material, but I was creating 10 6-minute pieces. So what I would do on the off time when I wasn't sitting in front of the piano is I would start to move things around, reverse audio, like I said, play with all the panning and stuff. And I was realizing that I was producing while I was composing, and then the actual final composition had to do with the mix, and there were panning things and level thing, and this part, the volume dropped off extremely quickly because I wanted that effect, and then I had the reverb coming. So I was like, oh, I'm mixing this, and I thought about how do I give these stripes to a mixer, and it really was not, I was like, I don't want them to do anything with it, but I did want to warm up the sound a little bit. And so I talked to my master engineer. Is that something we do in mastering? So what I ended up doing is I mixed the record myself, and I ended up calling Chris saying, hey, what would you do to this? Is there anything in these mixes that is really sticking out or not great that the mastering won't fix? And Chris said, you know what, I think we can run this through a gorgeous Lexicon reverb. And so I hired Chris as a mix consultant to sort of smooth out some sounds. And there was an audible difference, and the master engineer agreed. So that was my process. And it was a real distinguished choice I made to mix this record, even though I would never consider myself a mix engineer. So that being said, I do want to talk to Chris about the process of working with a mix engineer and how you can get what you want as an artist and communicate it to a mix engineer, because the language is so different when you're coming from working with a producer or co-writer or songwriter, and you've got the song and you've been working with a band and recording engineers, and then you come into this other phase where it's so different. So first question for you, Chris, is what can an artist do to prepare or send you the right file? Like, what do you need before you even start the mix?
The number one thing I would encourage people to understand is the mix engineer is always going to have better equipment than you do. Mm-hmm. If you've got a reverb, if you've got the best reverb in the world, the mix engineer is going to have 14 of them. Or a hardware reverb. And so the gear is going to be so much better. So just be aware that while your best is really, really going to be probably what you're hearing, there might be something better. And so the way to prep for that is to go ahead, and if you've got a specific effect in mind, go ahead and print it and print it into the audio, but then print it dry or print it without so much effects, and give kind of the mix engineer room to breathe. A good mix engineer is going to be aware of the emotional content that you're trying to push, and he's going to be able to expand that story in different ways, or she's going to be able to move and breathe with that story. They're going to hear your story right away, and if they can't, they're going to work to go get your story and amplify it in a way that's maybe you hadn't thought of before, because that's our job. That's what we do. So to kind of sum up, print it the way you want it, but then give it to us so that we can make it a better version of that without destroying your original intent.
So that's really cool. So for me, I could have done that a version like, hey, I did this panning thing, and I did this reverb thing, and I did this delay thing, but also here's just the audio dry. So you can hear what I was intending, but what can you do that would make that even better, essentially, is what you're saying. I like that. Now I'm like, I'm going to have regrets after this, aren't I? This call.
Yeah, you might want to go ahead and print the panning and some of the volume changes. I think that would be just fine. Mm-hmm. But be aware that there may be an EQ difference that would let something else speak a little better. Because again, it's all about the amplification of your original idea. And a good mix engineer, she or he's going to get that.
Yeah. And so the whole idea is that you want each track individually. So whatever there was a microphone on, you want it as a dry track. And then any other idea giving things, okay, cool. Yeah. Send it to me with your reverb or whatever. But we're talking about you getting between 5, 10, 20, 40 different tracks, layers of vocals, like nothing is already combined, essentially. Right.
That's right. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So that's what the artist can do. And sometimes this isn't even the artist. Sometimes this is the recording engineer, who may also be the mix engineer, but whoever recorded those tracks, they're going to get those in a file format that the mix engineer wants. And that's a conversation to have too, is what are you looking for? What file format do you want?
That's right.
Cool.
And have it named. And if you have a vocal that needs to be comped, by all means, comp it and make it done. A mix engineer has no business getting in there with your vocal comp. There's no reason that should ever be an option.
No editing is what you're saying. You're not asking the mix engineer, hey, can you take out the breaths or do this? You have to do that before you send it to the mix engineer so they can actually work with the audio quality. That's
right. Yeah, they don't need to be making what I call surgical decisions other than for the mix itself.
Perfect. That's really great. So, okay, so you get all the files. Now the mix is in the hands of the mix engineer and you're starting your process. What's the job of the artist at this point?
What I do with an artist is I like to do a pass either with the artist sitting with me or, I'll mix it to kind of where I think it's 90% done, and then I'll send it. And what I need from the artist at that point is just honesty. Don't worry about hurting my feelings. Just say, with tact and with grace, here's just line 1, change this. Line 2, I don't know about this. Line 3, can we have a discussion on this? Line 4, love it. Line 5. And what I'll do is kind of an emotionally detached engineer at this point, because I've already done what I think should be on your table. And now you're helping me tweak it to get it what should be on now your table. And so I'll just go down the list without a whole lot of problem at all. You want me to bring up the vocal? Great. If you do something that I feel is outside of norms, we'll have a discussion, but at the end of the day, you should win.
Awesome. So now the artist's job after they've sent you the files is to sort of sit back and wait for you to do your job. And then to be honest and open and kind and generous in the feedback process and really say, okay. And sometimes I want to stress this because this is something that I think, Chris, you really taught me, was that it's okay if I don't know what the solution is. If I'm hearing a problem or something that's not working for me, I can just say, I don't know what this is, but at 3 minutes and 4 seconds, it just feels a little funny, or this whole phrase is not feeling the way I want. And I'm sorry, I don't know what it is I do want.
And you and I have actually had that conversation on some mixes. Let me step back with you and say that the budget comes into play here. Mm-hmm. If you're paying a person $50, these conversations have to be very, very limited. And you're going to get what you get. And you can't be too demanding. Otherwise, the mix engineer will just shut down and stop being a feedback and a wall for you to bounce off of and start just doing and being an executor, so to speak.
Yeah.
And if it sucks, he or she will just let it suck.
Right. But if you're paying $5,000, that generally implies like, listen, we can have a little more back and forth. We can really get this place. And honestly, you guys, like $50 is not a thing you want to be paying your mix engineers. Like I would be looking between the prices that I have seen, depending on what sort of work I'm doing, anywhere between, I would say, $750 and $4,000 to $5,000 a track.
Yes.
Depending on who you get and their time limit and what other projects they have to squeeze in. So just to be realistic, you're looking, unless you get I do know some mix engineers work deals. If it's a 10-track album, they'll reduce the rate. They'll give you like 25% off to do all the tracks. It tends to, and I've gotten this question too, is it better to have one mix engineer for all of the tracks? Or, because I know, sometimes people work with different producers, different co-writers, but I think the thing that's going to start you definitely 100% want one master engineer. That's like,
absolutely.
That I don't think that's even a question. I think it's okay to have a couple different mix engineers as long as your master engineer knows that and it can work with like, okay, this mix came from this person. I've done that on records. I can hear the difference. But I don't think it's the worst thing in the world, especially if you're in communication with them.
Sometimes what people will do, and I want to get back to the other question just really quick, but sometimes what people will do is they'll put the money into what they think the big money tracks are. And so they'll spend $3,000 or $4,000 on, maybe 2 or 3 mixes, and then go back to the $600 and $700 guy for maybe the other mixes, or maybe even the $300 guy. Just depends on what the budget is.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really great.
At a high end, let's say, $750 on up, the mix engineers that are going to be able to charge that and survive on that are able to emotionally have a good conversation with you and are able to pretty much hear you describe a problem and come up with some solutions right away. And that's where the discussion happens. And so for me, for example, it's really important just to kind of dive in and, okay, you don't like it. Okay, who knows why? Maybe I think you're an idiot, maybe I don't, but my job is to listen and interpret what you're trying to say. That's my job. Yeah. And I'm so happy to have that conversation and so very equipped to have it.
Yeah. Yeah. How much do references help? Let's talk about references. And when in the process should you get references? Like, hey, I like this song. I like the drum on this song. How specific do you want? Or hey, here's a whole playlist of stuff. What do you like to receive?
It's helpful right away, right at the very, very beginning. there's a point where you have to divorce that and come on into your own tune.
Mm.
If I would say if a mix engineer is not hitting a home run, or at least in the ballpark on the first send, it's not going to work. If there's like, oh my gosh, she missed this, this is not right, nothing is right, find another engineer and, part ways as friends, because it's probably not going to work within 2 or 3 revisions.
Yeah.
If it's that far off.
Yeah.
But if somebody is,
you can get the feel and the vibe, like, okay, we're in the ballpark, we're close to this record, but you can have a lot of comments, but know that it's still in the vibe. I mean, we've gone back and forth like 10 times on the song, but I'm like, no, we're here. This is the sound. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
So, sorry, go ahead.
Nope, had nothing.
Okay. So you got your references, you got your audio files, you mixed it, you sent the first mixes, you got some revisions. You did the revisions. The artist is now happy with the mix. What is next? What is your final step? When do you step away from the project?
Well, as soon as you declare that you're happy, and as soon as all the checks are paid, you get the files, and they should be a 24-bit 44.1 kilohertz file for general mastering. Occasionally, I'll be asked to put a 88.2 or a 96K file, but that is very, very rare. There has to be a lot of money involved before people start being able to care about that.
Yeah.
But generally, a 24-bit file that's unlimited, or at least it leaves a lot of room for a mastering engineer. If you look at a final file from any mix engineer on, a workstation or something where it will display the waveform, if you see that it's just all one level, looking kind of like a brick, ask for a remix and have him leave off the final limiter, because the mastering engineer can do way more than the mix engineer can as far as boosting the volume and getting the final polish.
This is such a perfect leeway into our next conversation, which will be with a master engineer, talking about what do they need, what can you do, how do you speak that language. So this was really helpful. Are there any other sort of tips for artists that are coming into working with a mix engineer that you would say is an absolute need to know?
If you don't have a clear vision for where it should go, have a conversation with your mix engineer. And if you're liking what the bounce back and what the feedback is, that's your person. And if you are fairly confident of what you want, make sure you give references and make sure you are very clear that your mix engineer, he or she, understands that before you leave that first consultation.
That's awesome. I love that. How can people find out more about you, connect with you online?
My website is jchrisgriffin.com. My first name is John, and so I have the first initial J. So jchrisgriffin.com. I have an Instagram, jchrisgriffin, and I'd love to see anybody come by and leave a comment.
And those will be in the show notes, so I will make sure to put those links there. Chris, thank you so much. This was wham bam, super valuable. I think this is all the stuff that we wanted to cover, so thank you so much.
Yay, thanks for having me.